Welcome all. My name is Christy. I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books. We're hosting this event tonight. We're going to celebrate Connie's book, Truth Like Oil, what's your official release date for it, Connie?
It was May 25th when it came out, yeah.
We're still in that launch cycle. Belmont Books, I'm sure many of you know, it's an independent bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. We're super excited to have a local author friend of the store, So without further ado, or before I read the bios, if you have questions throughout the discussion, you can just put them in the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll have a little question session once Connie and Patty are done with their conversation. So please ask questions as they come up, and then we'll answer them at the end. So let me introduce our illustrious panelists. First, we have Connie Biewald. She's been writing stories in an effort to explore human relationships since before she was 5 years old. She has been a teacher and school librarian for more than 40 years, sharing her love of reading and writing with homeschoolers and hundreds of students in public and private schools in the US and Haiti. She is the author of 3 loosely connected novels that comprise the Rivertown trilogy, which are Bread and Salt, Digging to Indochina, and Roses Take Practice, in addition to the recently published Truth Like Oil. She is the grateful recipient of a Massachusetts Cultural Council Artist Grant, a Penn New England Discovery Award, and numerous residencies. And she'll be in conversation with Patti Smith, the other Patti Smith, the original Patti Smith, who is the author of the novel The Year of Needy Girls, a Lambda Literary Award finalist. Her work has appeared in numerous literary magazines and anthologies. A native New Englander, she lives in Virginia, where she teaches American literature and creative writing at the Appomattox, I'm sorry if I got that one wrong, Appomattox Regional Governor's School. She lives with her wife, Cindy. So without further ado, Connie and Patty, thank you so much.
Yay. Thank you. Welcome everybody. We're so happy to be here. And as Connie said, it's so strange not to see you out there, but we're glad that you're here and appreciate everything in the chat. So we thought we would get started with, Connie's gonna read a little bit first from her novel, Truth Like Oil, and then we will take it from there.
Right, and then Patty's going to read a little bit too. We're both going to read, and then we're going to converse, then we're going to take questions. Right. So I'm going to read a scene from further in the book. I want to read like a dynamic scene. Not that there are a lot of dynamic scenes, or it wouldn't be a good book, but I like this one. It's on page 86, and I don't think you need to know too much to enjoy it. Henry is the older brother, Nadine's the mother, and Chance is the younger brother. And I'll just drop in explanations if I think that they're necessary. But okay, so Chance is a senior in high school. He's kind of running amok, and his older brother is away at college, but has come back to try to help his mom deal with the younger brother running amok. And then now we're here, okay. Since Henry's departure one long week before, and the meeting with the principal, the silent emptiness of the apartment felt more ominous than welcome. Yara, that's Nadine's friend who lives downstairs, was away in Queens helping with her grandson. Though the birth had been easy, he wasn't sleeping much, so there was no one downstairs welcoming her home with food and reminders that Chance was a good boy. Upon opening the front door, Nadine paused, hoping to hear the throb of a bass line in the stairwell. She longed for sound, even Chance's music, maybe especially Chance's music. She hadn't seen him since the day he stormed out of the meeting. The school hadn't left any messages, so maybe he was going to class. When she called Henry, he told her not to worry, to give Chance space and time to cool off. He was staying in Junior's basement. When she called Chance, she heard a recorded message. She tried it over and over, feeling her agitation grow each time she couldn't get through. After checking her tomato plants, she dialed Yara's number, listened to her message in Portuguese, and hung up partway through the English. Yara would see her number and call back when she could. Such an empty house. In her mother's Laku on Lagunov, there was never a lack of company. The same was true at Uncle Maxime's in Port-au-Prince. Uncle's Miami house had been lonely much of the time, but even he had his American business partners come by. And when he was away in Haiti, she would invite Lucien and an occasional girlfriend. People weren't meant to live so alone. Her brothers would feel sorry for her, even though she had a television, a refrigerator full of food, and clean running water. She'd turn on the radio for company and use this time to get some laundry done. Her back insisted she lie down, but she told it to wait until the clothes were in the washer. All those stairs, her back whined. Nadine was an expert at convincing her back and every other body part that they really didn't ache or burn. She lifted the basket of dirty uniforms from the floor of her closet. Only partly full, this load was hardly worth the trip to the basement. She might as well add some of Chance's, even though he'd told her not to, that he was man enough to take care of his own mess and didn't need anyone waiting on him. Besides, his jerseys and undershirts needed to be turned inside out and washed on the delicate cycle in cold water, and he didn't trust her to do them right. She, who had scrubbed the red-brown Lagunov dust out of white church clothes with her hands when she was a child, wasn't a good enough laundress for his Celtic shirt. The boys' cave-like bedroom needed an airing. She threw open the curtains and raised the window a few inches. The evening sun shone on the two beds. Henry's made neatly, unslept in for a week. Chance's also unslept in for a week, a tangle of sheets and blankets. She stumbled over a basketball. It rolled into a corner. Chance's dresser drawers hung open, clothes spilling out. She picked up a smoky, sweaty t-shirt from the floor and tossed it into the laundry basket with some balled up socks, underwear, and a pair of jeans. Something fell from the jeans pocket, a little notebook. She plunged her hand into the other pocket and removed a plastic bag full of tiny bunches of dried up leaves. They had to be marijuana buds, and another plastic bag with smaller bags of buds inside it. Her lower back spasmed. She did not settle in the USA and work so hard only to have her boy turn to drugs, if that was in fact what he was doing. She tucked the leaves and the notebook into her own pocket, lifted the basket, and pushed through her pain down the stairs to the basement. She tossed the clothes into the washer. With her elbow, she slammed the lid and then realized she'd forgotten to add detergent. She clung to the smooth edge of the machine and took 3 deep breaths while whispering relaxing messages to her back. After adding detergent and starting the wash, she allowed herself a few more long, careful breaths as she listened to the water begin to fill the machine. She talked herself up the stairs, basement to the first floor, first to the second, into her kitchen where she dropped onto a chair. She set the bags and notebooks in front of her. Names and numbers, dollar amounts filled the pages. Money paid, money owed, $10 increments. He was a drug dealer. She needed advice. Who could tell her what to do? The bags and the notebook sat on the table, blaming her, shaming her. She considered calling the vice principal. He might have had experience with this sort of thing. She thought of calling Henry, but she hadn't talked to him all week, and echoes of, "I'm not his fucking father," still rang in her ears. What would the deacon say if he knew his bastard son was selling drugs? The questions that haunted her pressed harder than ever. Would Chance be a good boy if he'd been raised in the church? Would Chance be a good boy if she'd beaten him when he deserved it? Would Chance be a good boy if he'd grown up hungry and carrying water and feeding the goats on Lagunov? Maybe not, but he wouldn't be a drug dealer, that was for sure. Far below, the front door squealed open and banged shut. She listened for the footsteps. It had to be Chance, her bad boy. She shielded the pile of evidence with her arms, sat up straighter in the chair, and waited, ears attuned. The footsteps, with their distinctive pounding, shuffling tread, belonged unmistakably to her criminal son. Chance burst into the apartment and made his way toward the kitchen, talking on his phone. "Word, I got that. Hit you up later. Be easy." He poked his head in the kitchen door, nodded, still talking, and walked on past, leaving a cloud of alcohol and weed behind him. The first time he'd laid eyes on her in a whole week, and all he gave was a tilt of his head, she snatched the bags of weed and the notebook and followed him to his room. The door hung open a crack. His back to her, he tapped out another number on his phone. Nadine shoved the door with her shoulder, startling him into pivoting toward her, his bloodshot eyes wide. What the F? At least he did her the favor of catching himself before he cursed. Nadine shook the bags at him. Are you going to tell me about this? You're a big drug dealer now? Chance grabbed for the bags. She jerked them away. Mom, chill. Where you be getting that? Give it here. Your pockets. Her voice sounded strangled and shrieky, unfamiliar. Chance seemed to notice his jeans had disappeared from the floor and began kicking clothes around in a half-hearted attempt to locate them. Why are you even in my stuff? Where are my pants at? Your stuff? She couldn't stop yelling. Criminal stuff. She followed behind him as he circled the room. Mom, where are the pants? They're in the washing machine. I was doing you a favor, Mr. Big Shot. I told you I wash my own clothes. Chance whirled to face her. What else did you find in the pockets? This? She screamed, flapping the little notebook at him. Is this what you want? Yes. He caught her arm, gripping it tight, and tried to pry her fingers from the book. She flailed her arm, struggling to pull free. His menacing look scared her, but his criminal dealings scared her more. She would not give back that notebook. Mom, chill, you're going to get hurt. He squeezed her arm so hard there would be bruises. The way you make your bed is the way you will lie on it, she hissed. I don't need your old sayings, okay? Leave me alone. I'll hurt you. Oh, you're going to hurt me now, she taunted. Go ahead, big drug dealer man, hurt me. Is that what you want to do? Nothing could hurt worse than his lack of concern for his own future. He might as well put marks where they could be seen on the outside of her body instead of hidden in her heart. They stared at each other. She would not back down. Chance's grip loosened. I don't want to hurt you, his voice shook. The edge of his lip trembled. You're my mother. I don't want to hurt you. She rubbed the sore spots on her arm. You're my mother, he said, tears in his voice. I would never hurt you. I love you. I was planning to get your name tattooed on my neck. Don't do that, she said. Give me the bags and the notebook, please. No, I'm not a fool. I know you are breaking the law. His voice turned angry and serious again. You don't know anything about this. Let me get straight with what I have. Pay off my debts. You gotta give me those buds. What would Henry tell her to do? Yara, Vice Principal Johnson. If Chance didn't pay his debts, would big dealers come after him? He was right. She didn't know anything. She threw the bags and the notebook at him and left the room to return to the basement. Chance is a good boy, she whispered, body shaking as she put the clothes in the dryer. She would take them out when they were done and fold them in warm stacks. She would set his pants, shirt, socks, and underwear neatly on his bed. He would look and smell fresh and clean when he wore them to school in the morning.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you. Oh, that was a great section. So, as Connie said, she had thought it would work well if I read also, and I'm happy to do that. So, one of the things that, if you don't know, the two of us, we were longtime friends. We were colleagues both at the Fairweather Street School, and both our books take place in kind of Cambridge. Connie's in real Cambridge, mine in kind of Cambridge. So I'm going to read a short section and then we're going to chat. And let's see what you need to know about. So it's the Year of Needy Girls. And it is about a teacher, Deirdre Murphy, and she teaches at a private school called Brandywine Academy. And when the book opens, a young boy in the town has been abducted and sexually assaulted and murdered. And that crime sets off a kind of a witch hunty feel in the town. And Deirdre, she lives with her longtime partner, Sarah Jane, who goes by SJ. And so the people are kind of out for her job. I'm just going to read a short section. This is the 4th chapter. This gives you some insight, I think, into Deirdre, who is a very well-meaning, dedicated teacher, but certainly flawed. Here we go. Autumn meant field hockey, cheering on the sidelines, yelling out the girls' names. You could be passionate about them here, wearing your Brandywine sweatshirt, school spirit on visible display. You could love the girls openly, a kind of parental love and pride that was acceptable. When you were learning to be a teacher, taking graduate classes in methods, sitting in lectures about differentiation or the plight of the gifted child, no one talked about the most difficult thing, how you were going to love the kids you taught, how you might even love them inappropriately or want them for your own, how you had to learn not to resent the parents. No one facilitated a discussion about the possible disasters waiting to happen if you mistakenly forgot that you were the teacher and the kids were your students, not your children, and not, God forbid, your friends. But it was sometimes difficult to remember this. Deirdre couldn't talk about how she felt to anyone, not even SJ. Especially not SJ, who was already judgmental about the amount of time Deirdre spent at Brandywine, the hours she spent agonizing over the girls' private lives, which, SJ liked to remind her, were private. Do you have to go to every home game? SJ often complained. You do get to take time for yourself, you know. But if Deirdre missed a game, then she might miss Anna's biggest goal, and then she would feel terrible, like she had let the girl down and missed an important moment in her young life. She wanted the girls to take her seriously in the classroom, she tried to explain to SJ. And if she showed them that their lives mattered to her, they were more likely to listen in class and learn. The truth was, Deirdre loved attending the field hockey games, the long autumn afternoons, a kind of symphonic lull in the middle of the city. The field, located a few miles from Brandywine, did double duty. Used both for youth soccer league as well as the Brandywine field hockey games, it was surrounded by oaks and maples and made you feel as though you were not in Bradley with its factories and triple deckers, but out in another part of the state, in one of those picturesque New England towns with its own private school, the kind with glossy catalogs and a campus, the kind of place with big town greens where festivals were held and rich people retired, the kind of place in which the West Enders pretended they all lived, forgetting about the East End that was, in spite of their amnesia, part of Brandywine, part of Bradley. Here at the games, Deirdre stood near the cluster of parents, mothers mostly, dressed in smart-looking outfits, all in inappropriate footwear, heeled boots or cute slip-ons that did not navigate dampened grass fields effectively. Their hair, Deirdre noticed, always looked newly cut and styled, smooth and shiny, not the mess that hers inevitably turned into after a full day of teaching. Next to the mothers, she felt unlovely, but she tried to reassure herself that no matter what, the girls wanted her here, and in some cases, wanted her here even more than they wanted their own mothers. Secretly, Deirdre was thrilled when any of the girls confided in her something they couldn't discuss with their mothers, though she always encouraged them to bring it up at home. Your mother, she would insist to the girl sitting in front of her, wiping away tears. She needs to know how you feel. You need to tell her. And when the girl would resist, would say something about how her mother just wouldn't understand, about how it was amazing that Miss Murphy did understand, how it was awesome they had a teacher like her who got them, then Deirdre felt the power she wielded and reveled in it just the tiniest bit. And that's all I'm gonna read right now. So, Connie and I were talking beforehand, and we were saying that one of the things that both, I think it's important in our friendship too, right, is this fact that we are both educators. We've both been teachers for a really long time. And if you don't know this, she had a wonderful interview on Here and Now from WBUR on public radio. And Robin Young was saying that Connie's book was kind of perfectly timed for graduations because there's so much in there about Nadine's fear of Chance not making it through, right? Not getting through graduation. And I mean, I knew this was true, but I hadn't thought of the book in that way. So like I had sort of forgotten that was like a central thing for Nadine, right? Like this is gonna be a big deal if Chance can't graduate. This was weighing on her heavily. But I started to think about the fact that we both are teachers, for so long, and I was my first question for Connie was, what do you think, what's the influence you think that has on your teaching? Or do you think it has an influence on your writing?
Well, it has to have an influence on my writing because it's such a big part of who I am. I just think it's an interesting combination of being a teacher and a writer. Like I was an English major, and I loved being an English major. I loved writing poetry. I loved acting in Shakespearean plays. But yet I always knew the jobs in writing where you could actually make money did not appeal to me. Like I didn't want to write for a credit card company or a business or even like a good, a column or something, which would be a juicy job, but I didn't even want to do that. I just knew that I had things I wanted to write that no one was probably really going to pay for. And so I made a very conscious decision. Instead of going to a master's in poetry at San Francisco State, I ended up directing a daycare program and then ended up going to graduate school for education. And it was really all about money because I wanted to do something I loved where I could get paid and keep writing free to not have to worry about being paid for it. And it turned out it was pretty okay. I mean, now that I'm making enough teaching where I don't have to teach in the summer too, which I did for many years, now it really works. So I think the two really complement each other. I think especially being a teacher of literacy, like I think like a writer, I read to kids like a writer, I know how to pause and comment on something extraordinary in the writing in a way that doesn't, I think most of the time, mess up the story. So I think writing way more informs my teaching. That's how I usually think about it. But now that you say it, teaching definitely informs my writing. It's like, a lot of what I've learned about people is through my teaching, right? You probably know.
Yeah, well, and I was thinking about Chance and Henry too, right? Like how Chance is so disdainful, at least he's posing that way. Like that's his affect, like, oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, and then Henry is like kind of so serious about it, but yet both of their experiences are kind of, what's the word? A little, off-putting for both of them for various reasons, right? Because Henry's in this very white university and he's feeling kind of marginalized because of that. And then Chance is, I think, feeling very, like, why does it all matter anyway? And what's the relevance? So I was thinking about that too, and how much all your experience probably feeds into those scenarios, both your personal experience, but your professional experience too.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I mean, I feel like, people know, I think there's a lot of writers here too. We mine our lives, right, for the material. And, thank goodness we have all that material to mine. Yeah, so.
Well, and that leads me to the next question. So in my book, which started with this little seed of a true story, right? This, the abduction of the boy, which happened in Cambridge. And I kind of modeled the opening scene in my book on that because there was a lot of fear that the boy had been sexually molested by a man. And so those of us in the LGBTQ community were really nervous about that. And I kept asking that what if question, what if it had exploded? What if the witch hunt had happened? What would it be like? And in some ways, you're also taking some pieces of your own life, right? But then you're writing about Nadine, who's very much not like you. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, like maybe the challenges of that, maybe also the joys of that, like, getting to inhabit somebody else's life for a while. What was that like?
Well, I think it's so interesting. I mean, one of the best things for me about having a writing life is the places that it's taken me, the people that I've met. It's just made my life so rich. And one, really big thing is that when I started to think about this book, the seed of it was with the old lady in the book, the 90-year-old lady, Hazel, who's felled by a stroke in a nursing home. And it ended up after draft having a very small, but I think very important part for what I'm trying to do here, but very small in terms of pages, part in this, but she was the impetus. And her caregivers were all people of color. And I think that's such a common phenomenon in, at least where we live,
Yep.
you know, elderly white people who have become dependent on caregivers who are most always, I've seen people of color.
Yeah.
And so I found that a really interesting dynamic, because my grandmother, who I was kind of thinking about basing it on, was pretty blatantly racist, like not even quietly racist, but very blatantly racist. And my line, which is true, is she wouldn't, my mother brought her some Martin Luther King stamps and she wouldn't lick the back. And she wanted different stamps. So very blatant things like this. Talked horribly about these aides behind their backs, but then was very nice to them and dependent on them. And so I started to think, what are these people, the aides, the caregivers, thinking about these white people when they're so, you know, it's kind of, I guess it's obvious how racist they are. It's obvious, you know, it's such a hard job. So I started to just fantasize about that and wonder about that and wanted to explore that in writing. And then I honestly don't exactly know why Haiti. I've just always been interested in Haiti because it's close-ish. I like the name Haiti. I like the sequined voodoo flags. I like the metal art. And so I just decided to make her from Haiti. And that was 13 years ago. Now I would never do that. In this climate right now, I wouldn't have dared to take that on. I'd be like, I'm white. I'm not going to write a main character that's Haitian. But at that time, I wasn't thinking that way. And I did. And then I thought, well, she's Haitian. I better find out where she comes from because I don't know that much about Haiti. And that's when I connected with an educator. She wasn't a friend at that point. She was someone I knew through people, and started going to Haiti and ended up going to Haiti often for 10 years and teaching and getting to know people and completely getting sidetracked from my book in one way, but learning a ton. And during that time, my own sons were starting to have a lot of struggles that are reflected in the book. They're definitely fictionalized kids, but my own sons were having these experiences. And then I thought, oh man, and one of them had Haitian friends. And I thought, oh boy, if I were a person here who just come to the country and didn't speak English and, you know, didn't know how things worked, you know, it'd be even worse than it is for me. And it's already for me pretty bad. So let me try writing that and see how that feels. And then it just started to roll along. So yeah, I think if you're going to write about a culture you don't know very well, obviously you have to learn about it. And I do feel like it's interesting to think that I wouldn't do it now.
Yeah.
Because what would have been lost? Like so much would have been lost. I mean, I have so many relationships in Haiti and I've done so much work there and continue to do work. And maybe I would have found that another way, but I don't know.
Well, so it brings up an interesting question too, because both as writers, and we're both teachers of writing, right? How do you approach that with students? Like, I know I always want to encourage my students, right, to try to imagine people fundamentally unlike them. But it is a kind of a particular issue right now in our time, in our world, right? So do you find yourself conflicted about that, like when you're teaching writing, or do you discuss that?
Not really, because I want kids to write. I just want kids to write. Like I work with younger kids, but I might feel that about high school too. I just want them to write, but then just raise this as an issue, you know, really raise it. And I think especially if you have a diverse group of kids, then it's pretty cool because then they can be sensitivity readers for each other, kind of, you know. And I just think they have to be very humble. You know, I've used this line before too, like writing takes so much hubris and humility, like, right? And so I feel like it takes a lot of hubris to write about someone that's different from you.
Yeah.
And you better do it with a lot of humility to be able to do it well or at all, or, you know, in a way. And even so, like I was very trepidatious about this book and still am, you know, I mean, I'm aware that I can get questions and that's okay. I mean, I feel like there's a reason why people of color in this country would feel mad if a white person is writing a story about them. There's plenty of good reasons for that.
Yep, for sure. I know I came across something, let's see, I think it was Alexander Chi, who said, you want to ask yourself, why do you want to write from this character's point of view? Do you read writers from this community currently? And why do you want to tell this story?
Uh-huh.
And those seemed like pretty reasonable questions to ask yourself, right? Before you take on a project like that.
Yeah.
But it also, leads me to think about, we talked about this a little, I think. So I teach high school students who want to be writers. And I had a couple of students this year who were I also teach American literature, and they do a big research paper for me. And I had two students who wanted to write about the issue of representation and the lack of representation, right? And as it happened, they both really wanted to focus on the lack of representation in terms of LGBTQ characters. And which I think, and we had lots of discussions about it, and I think YA books handle it much better than adults handle it, for sure. But my thought was, this is kind of a multifaceted question, I guess, or we could chat about it a little together, but where does the responsibility lie for that? Like, some of it is our own as writers, right? And then there's this little piece of me that thinks, like I don't think we want to reduce it to you can do this and you can't do that, right? We want to still be able to imagine this full experience. So do you think, is it the publishers that we need to hold to task more? Is it a combination? And I guess to go along with that, what do you think about writers? Like, what's our responsibility to kind of people our worlds with a diverse group of characters?
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about that a lot too.
Yeah. That's a
big one.
Really big question. I know for myself, I am kind of only interested in power differential. That's one of the only things I'm interested in writing about is power differences. And so it could be older people, younger people. It could be like the book I'm writing now is a very established Yankee woman and a recent Irish immigrant. So I don't know. It's just what I'm interested in is power, and race right now comes into that a lot, right, in our culture. I kind of, one thing I comfort myself with a little bit around my responsibility is I know I have done a lot of workshops in Haiti with adults and kids to teach writing. And a lot of people, because they were in this workshop, wrote their stories. And I don't know if they would have otherwise. And then went on to teach other people how to write stories or to, so I think trying to share the wealth, like I feel like I'm so lucky. I mean, it takes a lot of privilege to be able to write. Yeah. Like you need time, right? You need access to resources.
Yep.
So I feel like the more we can do to make sure that a wider range of people have those, the better. I mean, give money to programs.
Teach our kids.
Yeah.
Get them out there in the world writing their stories, right? Mm-hmm. It's so important.
I know I have a former student who I was so happy is working for Beacon Press. And when I taught her, I didn't even know she was interested in publishing or writing and she's a kid of color, a woman of color.
That's great. That is awesome.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a big question. I guess maybe it's just really good that we're struggling with it in a way too, as writers ourselves, to think about how, what is the story? Jackie Woodson says, you can tell my story, but you have to have sat at my table. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another way of saying kind of what Alexander Chi was saying. And that seems to make sense to me. But yeah, it's a big question.
Well, so far I've gotten, a lot of good feedback about this book and the representation in this book. And I am always wondering, like, well, would the people who don't like it really say
Tell
anything?
you.
Like if I turned into a big famous person and this was out there, I'm sure I'd get a lot of crap, right? But the people who are reading it, I think are, you know, mostly like friends or friends of friends, or, you know, and they're not, I don't think they're going to go out of their way to give me their negative feedback unless there was something they really found offensive. And then I hope they would actually.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine that. I think it was, I mean, it's beautifully done, I think, and really rings true too, you know.
And I had a lot of people read it to vet it, you know, with that sensitivity reader eye before I dared to put it up there. So
That's great. I wondered if do you think you want to read any more sections from it, just to give people another little sense of what the book is like?
I don't know. I wonder if people have any questions.
I know, I'd be curious.
Comment. It is really weird doing this webinar thing because
Because we can't see people.
I know. Why don't we see if anyone has any questions, and then if there are things if there's time at the end, I'll read a little more.
Okay. I don't see anything yet in the Q&A, but I don't know that that means they're not there.
Oh, Q&A. Yeah, I don't see it either.
Or the chat.
Anybody has questions or comments, put them in. Feels very lonely being so far from the audience.
It does.
For thoughts,
Well,
comments.
also to think about, I mean, I know, I wish I knew who was in the audience, because another thing that often people want to know is if you have advice, I mean, or even just feel like your good writing advice that you might want to give to people. You
Well, well, my best writing advice, I said it somewhere in a print interview, was from Grace Paley, who is like that. Talk about the riches that come from having a writing life. I loved her for so long as a young woman, and idolized her. She's my hero. And then I ended up actually being able to take workshops with her and meet her, and she was great in real life too. And her writing advice is keep your overhead low, your expenses low, and never live with anyone who doesn't support your writing. And I feel like those two things are really super important. And the other thing is, to me, I was just talking to someone about this, and a lot of you probably know this already, but it's so true. Writing, it's a habit. No, it's a habit. It's like exercise. And for me to get something done, I really need to take it off the top every day or most days, which is not always easy to do. It's really hard, especially when, you know, I write on the computer, and if I at all, and my mother depends on a little letter from me every morning to tell her what day it is and all that. And I have tried to do it the night before, but then I mess up on what day it is, and then I mess her up. And so I really haven't found a way to do it except to get on in the morning. And once I'm on writing my mother her daily letter, emails, I have to be so rigid about not looking at any email, because it's like right there in front of me. And then
it's so hard
on if I'm watching, because then at school. And so I think the main thing is to try really hard to write first thing without being distracted by other things. And then even if it's just for 20 minutes, the book is in my head.
I agree.
I can get back.
I so agree. And there's a question from Meg, and this kind of follows up on what you were just talking about too, about your process in general, like how do you approach the writing of a novel now? So this is your fourth novel, and it's interesting to see if they've been similar or different. Do you approach it chronologically? Do it scenically? Meg and I have been chatting about this a little bit too. So can you talk about that?
Mostly it's characters. And so, and I have mostly done them chronologically, unless I have sometimes, like during the pandemic, I got together with two of my writing friends once a week. That was one of the great things about Zoom, right? One lives in San Francisco and one lives in New York.
Yep.
We would get together every week for 45 minutes and do a writing prompt. So sometimes those fit into the novel in ways I hadn't expected, but that's sort of a separate thing. I really start with characters, and work chronologically through a whole draft, and then another whole draft, maybe from another point of view, and then another whole draft from another point of view, and then another,
Wow.
but it's pretty much chronologically. But I think I've gotten better. I don't know. No, it still takes a really long time in a lot of drafts. It really does. But it's definitely characters and putting them in a place so that they, what's that really great line from, oh God, what is her name? I keep forgetting. She came to Fairweather. She wrote Silver Sparrow.
Oh, Tyree Jones.
Yes. That line from her, she says, when I have two characters who are both right, I know I have a novel.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. Yes.
So I think that's such a great line.
And it is, because it's also important, right? Like I think about talking to I think one of the things that my kids struggle with sometimes is like the good guys and the bad guys, right? And you want to make sure you really have kind of good and bad guys, like all flawed, all right, at the same time. So that is great advice. And then also, Karen has a question about, can you talk about how any of your characters changed over the course of writing the book from your original conceptions of them, if that happened?
Yeah, that can happen for sure. Well, in this book, I think the biggest thing was, it wasn't really the character changing, though. It was more the book changing and taking Hazel out of it so much, taking her out of it. And, they don't really change. That's a really good question to think about. And I will think about that more. But I think when I start, if I keep going with a character, it's always been true that, the essence of them, I had it in the beginning. And they didn't really change significantly.
Do you plot out, like, do you plan out your plots, or do you kind of write it? Is it more organic? Like, do you move from scene to scene?
It's organic. I definitely feel like I should plot more. I want to plot more. I think I'd get done faster. But I don't know. What I do is I write it and then I apply the stereotypical thing of plot, and I see, oh, is it working in that way of like the first, whatever those are, that W thing. And it's funny, it often works out that it only would take a little tweaking to make it fit that structure.
Yep.
So I think I read so much.
Yes.
That's my other line I love, is Eudora Welty's line about that I should have by heart, because I refer to it all the time, but something about how writing is reading taken to its extreme, or something like that, going deeper. You could look it up. It's something like that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And I think I just read so much that it's in the way I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you probably have some sort of intuitive sense about the story, the story and the movement of it and the pacing and that kind of a thing too. Yeah. Kathleen Crowley wants to know how many drafts you did for this novel.
I don't even know,
A million billion.
No, because there's the whole draft. I could tell you there were two. It's sort of embarrassing, really, but there's two that I paid. I paid a writing teacher. Again, there were two solid ones where I felt like, okay, this is ready to really get some feedback from people other than my writing group, so I paid a writing teacher that I loved at Grub Street. I paid her to read it and give me feedback, and she gave me good feedback, and I changed it, and it still wasn't really right. And I was going to take the novel, there's a big class at Grub Street that's like the alternative to an MFA. It's the novel incubator class or something like that.
Yeah.
I was going to take that, but they didn't I would have taken it if they'd given me all the money, but they didn't. And a friend of mine said, instead of paying the money for that, pay another editor. I had this really good editor. She said, pay this editor, and then you don't have to read everyone else's stuff, and you can just focus on your own work. So I did that. So I paid twice, 2 editors. It's a lot of money too. They charge like, I don't know,
Yeah.
$1,000, $1,200. And she also gave me very good feedback, and I thought she was great. Both of them were great, and it still wasn't really ready. Although maybe that was the one I sent to Vine Leaves Press that finally took it. And then the good thing about getting published instead of doing it yourself is they gave me a developmental editor who I thought was fabulous. And she basically said, cut it. So
Okay.
this version, so this was the 3rd professional editor job. And I think this is fascinating. I hope that it's not boring to all of you.
No, it's great.
She said, we want to publish this book, but you need to cut 60 pages. And it was already pretty short. But I said, okay, you want to publish it? I'll do anything you want. And, but I don't really know how, where, like what.
Right.
So
And do you know why 60 pages?
she felt like it was bulky and like there was that much extra
Okay.
stuff. See, that's what I don't know about her. I don't know how she knew these numbers. But so I went through it myself with some of her feedback, and I got rid of 30 pages easily. And then I said, oh, I don't know how to get rid of these other 30 pages. Like, I really need more help.
Right.
And then what she did was she went through and she would say, she'd just write on the side, like, okay, this paragraph needs to be cut by 20%. This paragraph needs to be cut by 50%. And so I literally, me, who's not a math person at all, I literally like just counted the lines and said, oh, 20% of this paragraph would be 3 lines. What 3 lines should I get rid of? And I did it. And
Wow.
I really like the way it reads now. So I think it worked.
What a great revision exercise, just as an assignment.
Yeah.
You know, to have kids take a piece and say, cut that by 20%, or
Yeah.
cut that, you know, cut that by 15%. Because I mean, did you think it taught you something about precision, or did you notice the pacing started to?
Yeah. And I loved it that I loved that she left it up to me too.
Yeah.
Like, she really just left it completely up to me. Like, this is just too bulky. Like, you need to get rid of some of this. And, you know, I've had other writing teachers who will, you know, write on the side, like condense, but to be so specific, like condense, I don't know, it helped me.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Do you have a sense, and then I'll go back, don't worry people, I'm not forgetting your questions, but this is sparking more questions to me. Do you have a sense in those first 2 professional edits, do you have a sense now looking back, like what it was that was missing initially, that you felt that you weren't getting interest in the book? Do you know what I mean? Like, or when you said, oh, it wasn't quite ready, like, do you have a sense now of what that was missing?
That's a really good question. Honestly, I think, well, I know back to the question about how a character changed.
Okay.
Gary Watkins in this book did change, because in the first draft that a teacher read, he was much less appealing. And even the writing teacher at one point, when I had him standing on a table with his feet next to a cake that he'd made and his yellow toenails like next to the cake, the writing teacher said, give this guy a break. You have to give this guy a break. So then I realized, okay, I better make him a little more appealing. So he did change, back to that other question. But I just think, right, anybody who writes here knows it's almost like you can't do it without going through it. Like the things that those editors were commenting on, you know, I think any editor or other editors reading it at that point would have commented on those things. But you can only do so much with each draft, maybe, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think like those earlier writing teachers couldn't have said, cut this, cut that, because I think it was in a different stage, and I was still trying to get the characters right, or I don't know.
It's hard to pinpoint, but I was just curious if you had like an epiphany, like, oh, this happened.
No epiphanies that I can even take on to the next.
Okay, no worries.
I wish.
Kathleen Crowley has another question and wanted to know, is there anything you ended up leaving out of Truth Like Oil that is still with you and you might want to go back to?
Well, I want to use some of the Hazel material because I have really, really, really good, well-written, good material about that woman. And, you know, very good writing that I had to just take out whole scenes and make less of her. So I want to do something with that. And especially now that I'm dealing very intimately with my mother in an assisted living situation. And I feel like I have more to add, you know, to make it deeper and richer and all that. And then also things about Nadine's past, like one criticism I have heard about this book as it stands now is they'd love to know more about her background and her past. And I feel like I've kind of just suggested it here really, because it was about now. And I could definitely write more about that, which would be fun to do.
Yeah. Did you feel like that your own self? Like, I know, so like some of the stuff like with her uncle, right? The stories with her uncle, which definitely, I mean, we know what went on, but it is not detailed, let's put it that way, right?
Mhm.
And then I know I felt like that with some of my, like with SJ and her background in my book. And then I remember thinking, oh, I kind of glossed over that. I should have said more about it, but I don't know. Did you think about that when your book was published? Like, oh, maybe I should have said more about Nadine's past.
Yeah.
It's like,
But that's not one of the hardest things about writing, and talk about teaching writing and trying to, like, you know, I'm a good writing teacher for kids that love to write, right? Which probably almost anybody could be. But when kids are just completely stymied, like there's just so many, I'm painfully aware of all the choices when you have the computer screen or the paper in front of you. And
right.
so many kids who just can't make a decision of what word to put down, never mind what to put in or what. And so I think, you know, my goal as a writing teacher is to just try to get kids to be able to spill onto the paper, you know?
I know.
And not everybody can work that way. A lot of kids really want it, you know.
And yeah, no, it's, so as you know, I teach it's an advanced fiction class, and the kids write 100 pages of a novel draft, right? They're high school kids, mostly juniors, some seniors. So I think that's amazing, right? To be 16 and write 100 pages. But, and we talk, you know, we read first novels, we talk about them, we're doing all this work. But I had a student this year and she hardly wrote because she kept saying, well, what if it's this? And maybe it could be that. But oh no, but maybe the father does this. And I was like, okay, well, at some point you just have to commit. And you can always change it, right? You can always go back in, but it's, I think the other thing that's hard for people who don't write maybe is how it is time. Like you said, there's no way to do it until you go through it, right? Yeah.
And you do, you know, you wonder if it's worth it sometimes, because, I mean, I know it's worth it because it keeps me feeling centered and happy in my life. So I can say it's worth it for that.
Yep.
But you know, that's another great writing line is Annie Dillard. Like, nobody cares if you're writing, really. Nobody really cares. They'd much rather have you teaching them or, you know, cleaning the house or, you know, that's another great Grace Paley poem, The Poet's Occasional Alternative, about making a pie. I love that poem. So it's hard to do something that no one else really cares about, that if you're doing it, they'd rather have you doing other things for them.
And that's a hard thing to, you know, to sustain yourself with, right? Like when I remember thinking, so I always tell the story about how I'm not an athlete, like I'm not athletic, but then I used to like do these long bike rides and I would train for these triathlons and I couldn't finish a book. And I kept saying, all right, why is it? Like, why can I get up and train for these things, but I can't sit down and write and finish? Like, not sit down and write because I was doing that, but finish, like commit and finish, you know? And I thought, because nobody cares, like no one cares at all if I write this book. Nobody cares except me. And so that's a hard thing in a way to take on, right? You have to just decide whether you care enough. Because if you don't, oh well, there's so much other things that can take up your time if you want to let them take up your time.
Yep, that's true. And plus I'm very social and I love to be with people. And in fact, I think for me, writing is a way that legitimized for me being by myself. I think I needed a way to be by myself, but I wasn't really used to being by myself. So being with characters was a way that I've been doing that. And now I really, I really like it, and I've kind of addicted to it, but I have to do it to be happy. So
Well, that'll lead me to another question too, which we had mentioned together earlier, which is the role of literary friendships in your life, Connie Biewald.
they're my best friendships mostly.
No, but
Yeah.
they're really important, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're crucial, in fact, to sustaining your life as a writer. And
Do you feel like people understand? And even, at Fairweather, and I see parents here from Fairweather who are also writers, like that was very sustaining too. Like at school, to know, people, I'm there because I'm teaching people's kids, and they're there because their kids are there, but we're all writers, and it just feels so great to be understood in that way, to know that you have that thing in common. And
that's right. Well, I think we are almost out of time. So I just wanted to make sure if anybody out there hadn't put a question in the Q&A and they wanted to, they can. And then maybe, or if Connie, you had any last words you needed to share that we didn't get to, words of wisdom to impart.
Just thank you, everybody, for being here, and just spread the word, because word of mouth is my my marketing strategy. It's not that. It's only effective if you guys talk about it.
And it's hard having a book launch during a pandemic, everybody.
Yeah.
So let's help do what we can. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much, Connie and Patty, for being here for the wonderful conversation. And thank you to everyone who was able to attend.
Thank you.
It's fitting that we end on a note talking about literary community, because this is one way that we can kind of foster those ties. So thank you so much, Connie and Patty. We have links to Patty's books from Belmont Books. You can also come visit us if you're local.
You're open now, yay!
And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting us.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.